Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Did you know that slavery was technically legal in the Utah Constitution until 2020? We'll talk about how voters voted that out, and an amazing film called The End of Slavery by my good friend Loki Mulholland. He's an Emmy-award winning director. He won an Emmy for his film The Uncomfortable Truth. And we're going to learn more about how Utah decided to vote this provision out of the Constitution in our next conversation. So this will be a good lead up to the Juneteenth celebrations here to celebrate the real end of slavery. But you can see that there are still provisions even as late as 2020, so that's pretty interesting. So you don't want to miss this episode. Check out our conversation. All right, well, welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm excited to have an Emmy Award winning director here. So could you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, I'm Loki Mulholland. I'm the executive director and founder of the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation. I make films and speak and write books and all that sort of stuff on social justice issues.
Yes.
And I'm the son of Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, which is our foundation's named after. She's a civil rights icon.
And your mom.
And my mother, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
I forget that part sometimes.
This is exciting. I've known Loki for 15 years, probably.
Yeah.
And we were actually in the same ward.
Yeah.
And so, so Loki has his own podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, The Uncomfortable Truth. So the podcast talks about race and racism in America. And it's titled after the film, the Emmy-winning film that we did called The Uncomfortable Truth as well. And it's Lou Von Brown, who's a freedom rider, African-American, what is he, like 70 now, at least. And myself, so black guy, white guy, having the conversations that usually don't take place. And so, we just kind of go through all that. Season 1 was really kind of dialing in on race and racism in America. And Season 2 right now, we're doing interviews with some of our friends who are civil rights activists, people like Ruby Bridges and Dave Dennis and Jane Elliott and the like, so.
Well, cool. So, yeah, it's pretty fun. We've known each other for a long time. You actually started out making other films that were not documentaries.
Believe.
So give us a little thumbnail sketch of what Believe's all about.
So Believe's a mockumentary about network marketing. So it's a satire about the multi-level marketing industry.
Yeah. And I'm trying to remember.
That's good times.
Your main character, was it Lincoln Hop?
Lincoln Hoppa, yeah.
Yeah, so he's
going to be in the new film The Witnesses, I think it is, or The Witness.
Oh, okay.
He plays Martin Harris, I believe.
Well, and he was in the Singles Ward before that.
Some people and Saints and Soldiers, he's been in those, and a lot of other shows and stuff,
Yeah. So it's a funny movie. My family fell in love with it, and so I know it didn't get a lot of play in the theaters, but it's a funny movie. Go look it up. Believe it. It's pretty funny.
So I actually did an interview at. I probably shouldn't say the name, but I did an interview at a network marketing company, a job interview for video production, and the first question they had is when the door was closed, it was like, "So are you the guy who made Believe?" I'm like, yep. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, I'm not getting this job. And they're like, the guy kind of looks around, even though doors was closed, he's like, yeah, we thought it was great. We loved it. I'm like, that's great. Right on. I'm like, I'm not getting this job.
That's hilarious. I hadn't heard that before. Well, great. Well, tell us about your latest project.
So my latest project is called The End of Slavery, The Fight for Amendment C. And it's about the fight to actually take the language of slavery out of the Utah State Constitution. So when the Utah State Constitution was written, they actually wrote in the language of the 13th Amendment, which was that slavery is abolished except as a punishment for crime for those who've been duly convicted. And what that means is that you could be re-enslaved again. Not you and I, but African Americans, because that's what it was written for. And so that was created as a nod to the South, to re-enslave people, to put them into penal farms, and then do convict leasing. So what they would do is you could, if you were African American, you could be arrested for something like loitering. Loitering meant that you didn't have a job and you're just kind of hanging around. Well, problem is that white people weren't going to hire black people, so you couldn't get a job, right? So now you get arrested, You're put into the penal farm. You're leased back out to the mines, to the railroads, to the farms, to, plantations, and worked like a slave all over again. This is all part of the black codes and everything.
It's not just picking up trash on the street.
No, it's not just picking up trash on the streets, not things like you think about today. But that was really the start of really kind of the jailing institutions that we have today. And so it was just another way, not only to re-enslave people, but also to take away the right to vote, right? And to because voting is power, and African Americans at that point had the right to vote, but we need to take that away from them, and so that became also part of that whole system. Well, what was interesting was here in Utah again. Utah was founded 30 years after slavery ended. The Civil War was done and everything, and yet for some reason they wrote that in there.
Yeah.
And so Sandra Hollins, she is the first black female elected official in the state of Utah, and right now she's the only black elected official in the state of Utah.
Well, we've got Burgess Owens technically.
Well, but he's not a state official.
Okay, he's a federal official.
He's a federal official. Yeah.
Okay.
So this was brought to her by a reporter who said, "Hey, by the way, did you know this was still in here?" And Colorado had already passed this, right? Utah's not the only state that has this in their state constitution, but they took it out in Colorado, and so they're like, "Wow, okay, well we need to do this here in Utah." So a couple years back, I want to say it was 2019 or so, 2018, 2019, the bill was passed in the House, which is where she is, and then it went to the Senate the next year, and then it was on the ballot for the state of Utah to vote whether to take it out or not. The interesting thing I thought when I was making the film was that in the state capitol, I was like, so I wanted to get a shot of like Sandra standing in front of the Constitution. We'd rack focus from her to the Constitution, like chiseled on the wall. I don't know why I thought it'd be chiseled on the wall or something, but there was no copy of the Constitution anywhere in the Capitol building. I'm like, well, no wonder why no one knew that was there. Right.
So it's hard to find the Utah Constitution.
It's like in a vault down in like underneath the Rio Grande, archive.
So, because we always hear about senators that have their little pocket Constitution of the United States.
Right.
Why do we not have that more available here in Utah?
That's above my pay grade. It's another film, I guess. Out of sight, out of mind.
So people just didn't know it was there, didn't know it was still there.
Well, I think for the most part they really didn't know that was there. I mean, there's so much stuff that's in the Constitution and such that, but the more important thing, this is not like one of those laws that people wrote like, 100 years ago that you can't bring a bear into church because someone did that and mauled everyone, So those little weird, those sort of funky sort of things. I think like in Louisiana, you're not allowed to chain a alligator to a fire hydrant, right? There's laws like this, but this is obviously a lot more meaningful. And this was written in the Constitution. The only logic anyone has that it was written in there was because Utah wanted to become a state, and polygamy was a big issue, right? And so they're trying to say, hey, look, we really want to be Americans, right? Whatever that means. And so they basically just took the U.S. Constitution and its amendments and threw it right into theirs, and just went about their merry way. And and the idea is like, oh gosh, well, we're not going to have slavery again. That's why I actually said that to Sandra. I said, look, well, it's not like we're actually really going to have slavery again. So she goes, well, yeah, but words have meaning, and those words weren't written for you; they were written for me. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So I was lucky enough to watch your film, and the one thing that I think is interesting to me is because you just focus on the 2020. It took us until 2020 to actually abolish slavery completely in Utah. But how familiar are you with like the 1852 Act in relation to service? Do you have a lot of background in that?
For Utah?
For Utah.
No, I do know that the slavery existed in Utah even prior to when it was even a territory, because this region, so the Mexicans were enslaving Native Americans and so forth. So there's a long history to all that in and of itself. But yeah, I'm not up on the 1852 stuff. 'Cause I was really focused on the current history.
Yeah, I know Paul Reeves is coming out with a new book on the 1852 legislature, because the interesting thing is that's when Brigham Young asked the legislature to legalize slavery, which of course lasted from 1862 until the Emancipation Proclamation. Was that 1864, I believe?
Yeah, 63,
Civil
64,
War
yeah.
period.
But the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free anybody.
Only in the South, that's right.
No, yeah, only in the South. It only applied to those people who were enslaved in rebel-held territories. So people in Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, they were still enslaved.
Well, I think in Pennsylvania they had an emancipation law that predated the Civil War, if I remember right. Possibly, so that kind of a gradual emancipation. But it was still technically legal in the northern states. And I guess we're neither one of us are real history experts, but it was soon after the Civil War when
I'm a history expert.
What's that?
I'm a history expert.
Okay.
It's not that part of history.
But so we had the 13th Amendment?
Uh-huh. Yeah, the Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th.
Okay, and so that's when we finally abolished slavery nationwide. Right.
Now, it didn't actually end until December of 1865 when the final state, when it finally passed, the final state, cleared the barriers. Now, technically, not every state signed that off. Or if they did, they forgot to mail it in. Like Mississippi, for example, didn't end slavery. Technically, slavery didn't end in Mississippi until 2014 or something. I mean, it's a little ticky-tack. We're getting a little there. But the fact of the matter is, there's a clerical error. So, I mean, what does that mean, right?
Well, so it's interesting that a lot of these slave states in the South tried to keep slavery alive through the penal system. And it's interesting to me that Utah, in a nod to the South...
Well, now, hold on now. Let's be clear on this. The United States kept slavery alive in the South.
Okay.
Because this was the United States. This wasn't the Southern states. This wasn't the Confederacy anymore, right? When they rejoined the Union and had to sign off on those amendments, the United States government decided that keeping that amendment, that language in that amendment was important enough to allow for the re-enslavement of African Americans, right? Now, it might not have been chattel slavery like we had in the past, but it was still slavery. But that was the federal government's decision, not the state's decision. That was the federal government's decision.
Can we blame that on Andrew Johnson more than Abraham Lincoln?
Well, Abraham Lincoln was dead, yeah, so we could definitely blame it on Andrew Johnson. I mean, Andrew Johnson, I understand, was just a horrible individual.
Yeah.
And even in his addresses to the federal, to Congress and stuff, and this is all documented because this is like his State of the Union stuff. I mean, he's literally saying, all this sort of language about that, blacks are inferior, and and slavery was good for him, and all that sort of rhetoric you hear. Because why? Because he was an enslaver.
Right.
He was definitely down for the Southern cause.
Yeah, and it's too bad Lincoln picked him. I know he wanted to have a unity government,
right?
And so he tried to pick a Southern Democrat on his ticket.
Well, it's to balance the ticket. Kennedy did the same thing with the Johnson. So Lyndon B. Johnson was to balance that Yankee ticket, because he knew that, guess what? I mean, the Southerners aren't going to vote for Catholics or Catholic president. I mean, they were lynching Catholics in the South. So, good grief, along with African Americans and Jews, right? Mm-hmm. Probably a Mormon or two.
Yeah. There's an interesting book about Joseph Standing, who was a missionary in Georgia that was lynched. There's a building in the MTC named after Joseph Standing. I actually stayed there when I was in the MTC, so I need to interview that author. She's not Mormon, and she talks about Joseph Standing's life.
Well, none of us are Mormon. We're Latter-day Saints. Let's just be clear on this.
That's right. But anyway, so interesting that slavery was technically abolished, but yet we have the Jim Crow laws in the South, and Utah. Why does Utah like to tie with Southern laws, such as this one here, where it's okay, we can still have slavery as a punishment, That's actually put in the Constitution.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, it was just a matter just to kind of appease, the Union in and of itself. Was because, hey, look, we want to be part of this country. We want to be a state in that respects, and it's just basically throw anything in the kitchen sink in there. Let's just look like let's allow our Constitution to look like the U.S. Constitution, and they just threw that in there. I mean, and it was kind of like, hey, we're not a bunch of crazy polygamous radicals and so forth. We're Americans. And I think more than anything, it was just optics. However, the fact of the matter is they felt that it was okay to put that in there to begin with. They didn't have a problem with that. Not every state has that. Right now, I think there's maybe like 9 states that have that in their constitution. Colorado, again, was the first one to kind of clear that out. It took them twice to actually do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Utah, hey, it only took us one time. Colorado, it took them twice. Oregon's working on that, right? They're next in line.
A northern state.
Yeah. Nebraska, I think the same time that we were doing it, so in 2020 they did it as well. But yeah, so no one really has a clear answer as to why that's in there, except again, I just kind of go on optics more than anything else. So
interesting. So, are you aware of any history of people being enslaved after statehood in 1896 as part of this penal system?
No.
So it was just more of window dressing than anything.
Right. But the fact of the matter is that exists there, and the same systems that the South was using could be applied here. But racism existed here. Still does, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
In case anyone's wondering. But yes, it's part of the attitudes, part of the the lens through which they saw things, and no one that could make those determinations thought it was a bad thing to have in there. Like, well, we don't see anything wrong with this. Well, of course not. Doesn't impact them. I think that was kind of the bigger part of the film in and of itself, was to help people understand why does this matter? Well, again, it doesn't matter to someone like me because it's not going to impact me. That would be the general attitude. We don't have to think about it as white people. But, Representative Holland's and her constituents here in the state, particularly African Americans, looked at it and went, oh my gosh, this is scary. All this stuff, adds up. It's just one more thing, right? If we don't need to have it, then let's get it out there, get it out of there. And of course, well, what about the cost and this, that, and this? Well, what about the cost? You tell me what the price of a human life is.
Well, and I know that there are some people. You interviewed some people in the documentary that were like, I voted no.
Yeah. We had a couple of people like that. You know what? It's interesting. So 20%. I think ended up being about 20% voted against the law.
Against repealing slavery.
Against repealing slavery in Utah, right? I think some of them felt that. Some of them didn't even know what they were reading. Didn't even know how to interpret what they were reading. Like maybe when they said no, they meant, yeah, I'm against slavery, right? Some people don't even bother. They're not reading stuff. There's it's just a blanket sweep, boom, done. But there are those, like a couple of people that we interviewed, who were just like, no, yeah, I'm opposed to this. Where does it end, right? And I think it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty impressive that only 20% voted against it, given the climate at the time that we had during that election. We just went through the summer with Black Lives Matter, not a very popular thing here in Utah amongst amongst a certain sect of people, and there's a lot of back and forth on that. So you're going through all these emotions and everything else, and here's one more thing, right? For a lot of white people, particularly here in Utah, they see something like that and they're just going, my gosh, man, what else do they want? Aren't they happy enough? They, meaning African Americans, of course. And so the fact that 20%, only 20%, now remember, Colorado, the first time they did it, didn't pass. So go Utah.
Didn't
right?
pass the legislature or didn't pass the vote?
Didn't pass the vote. Not enough people voted for it in Colorado. The second time, it finally passed.
That's weird.
Part of it was the language and how they phrased it and so forth as well, is my understanding. But the fact of the matter is, if you know how to read, then you should be able to understand what's being said. But yeah, then you had people who were, like in the film, one person talks about that this is like, that they want to take away our guns. It's like, this has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. You should have heard what else he said after that I didn't put in the film. He went off about Pelosi and this, that. I mean, all sorts of like, QAnon type stuff. It's like, oh my gosh. And then the other person was just like, well, I thought we already had slavery here. The IRS takes all your money.
I remember that.
Okay, whatever. And it wasn't like, we were cherry picking those responses. Those were the two people who were willing to talk to us, right? And then we were at a voting place. They allowed us to interview people, and we had to jump through a lot of hoops for that. But we interviewed 4 or 5 people. We only used a couple. It's a short film. We didn't want everything to just be interviews, but they were. One guy was a Mexican American. The other guy was Korean American. And different viewpoint.
Well, let me throw this idea at you. So, when we think of chain gangs now, we think of prisoners picking up trash on the freeway. Is that a form of slavery?
That's that was a question that was brought up of how that rehabilitation aspect of incarceration. So that was actually put into legislation because that was a concern that they wouldn't be allowed to do that. Provide those services for rehabilitation, whatever that's supposed to mean.
So picking up garbage is considered a form of rehabilitation?
Apparently so.
And so that's still okay to do.
Right. But the thing is that even in Utah, in a lot of states, you have situations where incarcerated people are being paid pennies on the dollar to make products for corporations. So I mean, I've talked to several people about that, even here in Utah, that not in the film, but they're like, hey, by the way, did you know that this, and this? I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was that bad. And so it's like, well, they're getting paid. Well, okay, but like in California, you had when the wildfires, they were taking incarcerated people to go fight fires. Well, that's a pretty dangerous job, and you're only paying them like a couple bucks, right? The capitalist argument to that would be if you're paying them $2 to make to fight a fire or whatever it is, then you're not going to pay the other guy $30 because look, I've got cheaper labor. So now it's just a matter of taking advantage of people, and you're suppressing the labor force anyways with those sort of things. It's exploitation at the end of the day because you have you have a group of people that really don't have a say in the matter, right? Oh, well, if you don't want to do this, then stay in your cell, whatever it might be. But there's an exploitation factor of that. That's just, I can get into private prisons as well if you want. I mean, so the problem with the private prisons and all that is that literally these private prisons are, they've sued states for not having enough prisoners. And these are public companies that trade on Wall Street. And so in their filings, they're saying that their whole formula is about having more prisoners. So they go and actually lobby Congress to find ways to imprison more people, to change up laws, to make things more strict, to stay longer in prison. Because why? Because they get paid by the state to incarcerate people.
And then when they can lease out their prisoners to do essentially
right.
Under minimum wage
right,
jobs,
yeah,
because I mean, there's a thought out there: why would slavery not be okay for prisoners? Because we're here to punish them, and let's punish them.
But that's not what that's not what prison's for. Prison is for rehabilitation, not punishment.
I think a lot of people would disagree.
Well,
with
of course they would. Right? Yeah, I understand that, but the way it's pitched is that this is about, making them, they have to do their time. We understand doing the time for the crime, right? But we want you to come out a better person, that you've learned your lesson, you've paid your dues to society, right? And come out a better person. Well, if you're being exploited and so forth, that's not really the whole point of all of that. And to think that they don't know that is pretty ignorant in of itself.
Well, and there are some people who complain that, oh, well, this person got a bachelor's degree while they were in prison, and I can't get a degree. Why are we paying to educate prisoners? What do you think of that argument?
It's cheaper, for tax purposes, it's cheaper to educate someone than it is to incarcerate someone. Plain and simple. There's been studies on that.
That was in one of your other movies.
It wasn't in my film.
Oh, wasn't it in your film?
No, it was in Waiting for Superman.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. But there's actually studies that are done on that. That is, to actually pay for 4 years of college, I think in the Waiting for Superman, it was all about, private school for these kids and then pay for college. And it was like 4 years of that was cheaper than 1 year of them being incarcerated.
Yeah.
And you have to understand the economics of that. Again, we're a capitalist society, so any capitalist would appreciate this, is that, well, if I'm incarcerating someone, they're not paying taxes. I'm paying for them to be in there. But if someone is, a productive member of society who's gone to school, who's getting higher wages, guess what? They're paying taxes. So they're adding to society, not subtracting from it. So you want more people to add to society, right? That's just, the way it should be. I mean, and look, we're not the Soviet Union here. This is not communism. We don't just throw people into gulags, right? Even though we've incarcerated more people than China. So what does that tell you? But nonetheless, so I mean, for all those arguments against socialism, well, gee, a prison system that pays people 15 cents or whatever to make Gucci watches and whatever. I'm just exaggerating, but that's more socialist than anything else. Yes, I'm getting a little political here. I know the arguments. Well, you sure you want this interview?
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Emmy-award winning director Loki Mulholland. In our next conversation, we're going to focus a little bit more on his mom, a civil rights icon, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland.
So by the time my mom was 19 years old, she'd been involved in about 36 sit-ins and protests when she joined the Freedom Rides and was put on death row. And that's the beginning of her story. But she's kind of the Forrest Gump of civil rights. She was everywhere and knew everyone. From Fannie Lou Hamer to Dr. King, Jackie Robinson. I mean, it's actually I learned more about my mom after I made the film than I did during making the film, because there's new stuff that comes out all the time.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, sign up at patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for $5 a month you can hear the entire interview without any interruptions. If you'd like to see the whole video, that's just $8 a month, and you can sign up either at youtube.com/gospeltangents or on our website at gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button. Or you can go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and I'll just need to make sure that we're Facebook friends, and I'll add you to our insiders group, and you can see the entire interview uncut. If you'd like to get PDF transcripts of our interviews, those are just $10 a month. And for just $15 a month, I will send you paperback versions of our transcripts as soon as they come out. Or, of course, you can buy them on Amazon as well. Go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents Interview, and you can see all of our transcripts there. Don't forget to sign up for our updates at Facebook.com/GospelTangents. Of course, you can follow us at Gospel Tangents on Twitter. To hear our interviews updated to your podcast player, go to tinyurl.com/gospeltangents and make sure you give us a 5-star review. And of course, you should show your support for Gospel Tangents with one of these cool t-shirts like this green one, or light blue, sport gray, royal blue, purple, of course black, beautiful gold, and of course Utah red. I probably left out some colors, but if you want to see more, go to gospeltangents.com/shop and you can get one of these. So once again, thanks for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.